forth. And of course, this week is Halloween week. You can't not do Halloween on Halloween week. All right, so one of the great things about doing this on Halloween week is we get to play with um, all of the great things that happen to be about Halloween. Now, I did a little deep dive about the origins thereof for Halloween, and you come upon some issues, and those issues are actually really great fodder for what it is that we do here. Um, because Halloween has so many different portions of it that are historical and religious and have been modified throughout the ages. And that's great tabletop RPG fuel for us. Okay, so Halloween, All Hallows Eve, All Hallow Tide, um, Old Halloween, all the different permutations based on culture and region and the um, the time period, whether it deals with the harvest or the um, the giving of honor and thanks for those that have fallen. Yep, All Hallows Eve. There are so many names for it, but the great thing about it is that using that in our tabletop RPGs is a great example of a single day, a holiday that so many different peoples could look at in their own manner, and even amongst the same people, look at it in based upon their age and the time period they grew up in. For example, Halloween has a significant religious um, association, whether it is uh, a very strict and fundamentalist Christian, all the way to your extreme pagan rituals and beliefs. There's also the idea that it associates with the harvest and the changing of the seasons and the gathering of food for the coming winter. There's also the implications of it dealing with the dead and the fallen, and the the honor or fear thereof of those that have passed away. And of course, as time has gone on, there's associations with evil spirits, the undead, monsters, and the the aspect of hiding ourselves by guising ourselves or souling ourselves by becoming by having less fear of the unknown, by wrapping ourselves in a guise that represents evil or fearful things, the things that we fear in life. Or as we come to more modern day commercialism, the idea of collecting candy from strangers and dressing in great costumes from movies and television and dreams and aspirations we have as kids. So, well, how do we use that for our tabletop games, especially here on Monster Monday? I think the most common form of using Halloween in that context is the idea that um, we the thinning of the membranes between worlds, I think, is the greatest thing that we can do. Now, I do understand that if you're watching this, that my image is freezing here and there and not moving, but I don't think that's the most important thing. I think the most important thing is the audio. So we're going to go with that for right now, and see if it doesn't distract anyone too much. But and of course, if you guys want to participate in the chat, there is of course YouTube and the Discord and over on Twitch, because we are broadcasting on Twitch as well. Now, the idea of the thinning of a membrane between worlds to allow um, the undead spirits or demonic or angelic apparitions to come to our world is a pretty good trope to pull on. I absolutely feel like if you have to have any excuse for incorporating like your undead creatures and such into your world, um, when normally they would not be in existence, say in a particular city or town. The idea of incorporating Halloween makes perfect sense. And lots of, if you take a look across the social medias of our world in the tabletop RPG community, you're going to see a lot of one-shot games or short shot games dealing with Halloween and taking that idea and running with it. There's also the idea of people dressing in costumes and suddenly, inexplicably becoming the very things they're dressing up as. Um, the young maiden that dresses as a fey creature with flowers in her hair and artificially sewn together wings suddenly becomes some kind of fairy or sprite or something like that. The one kid that dresses in a dark robe with horns on his head and a pitchfork becomes demonic, at least for the day. And that would be, I think, using that would be a pretty funny and a somewhat horrific trope if you wanted to do like a one shot, or this is something that happens only once a year in your gaming world, where many people maybe lock themselves away, but there are others who either don't believe in the rumors or don't take, All Hallows Eve quite seriously. And the the younger folk, or the people who just never grew up with this particular event happening in their world, maybe suddenly those things do happen to them, and it's the PCs that have to deal with it. Now, of course, there are social ramifications for that as well, right? Uh, if innocent people suddenly become ogres and pit fiends and ghosts and goblins and ghouls and such in the world, is it okay to go ham on them and start butchering innocent folk due to something that's beyond their control? If you have players who are really willing to embrace that, I think that would be a really cool concept that incorporates that. Yeah, and Omen says, I remember there was a game that was like that. I don't remember a game like that, but I guarantee you I'm probably pulling something like that out of the air, right? It's not, I'm sure it wasn't given birth in my head in a vacuum, but I'm pretty sure something like that isn't existent. Um, Disgaea 2 had that plot. It was a comedy, though. Well, so now remember, the horror actually has a lot of parallels with comedy, because comedy allows us to break the tension. And even though the comedy doesn't necessarily have to be slapstick, comedy, it does have a way of being able to break tension, especially if you are playing with players that they have a sensitive constitution when it comes to horror and things like that, or things get too heavy or too deep, or descriptions get a little bit too horrific. Sometimes you need a little bit of comedy to break that up. Obed says, talking about the comedy, says the senators turned into demons and the heroes think nothing changed much. Yeah, there is a bit of that, which would be pretty hilarious in a game where maybe people begin to turn into they become the monsters that they have inside of them, and the only people that aren't affected are like the PCs and maybe a few arcane individuals around town. And like you said, the PCs are like, yeah, kind of figured he'd be a snake, or a demon, or some kind of the bully in the local tavern becomes like a ogre or a hill giant or something of that nature. Yeah, it's like, yeah, kind of figures. So, but the other part of that is, if a large enough city has enough of these events going on, the PCs may not be able to just stand up and confront all these horrors. It may be more of like, it might be more hide and seek, rather than trick or treat for some of the heroes. If a major city of quite a few thousand begin having these transformations and such. So, one politico that changes into a demon might not be too bad, but a city of maybe a city with a few thousand and a couple of hundred of them start changing. Yeah, you might, with a potpourri of evil, or at least horrific things running around, might not be a good thing. Oh, and then Omen says with Disgaea 2, the whole world changed. Ooh, that's nasty too. Which could but some retain their minds. Now that would be a rather interesting concept. If the person who changes into the demon, do they become demonic in mind and behavior as well as appearance, or do they just retain their own personalities? Which in some instances would be hilarious if the person that goes to the local bakery and sees the person behind the bakery is nothing but like a diseased, desiccated corpse with bits of their flesh and snot and mucus falling down into the food while they're making their pastries for everyone. And they have their own. They still retain their own personality. Yeah, later on, when they turn back to normal, if they ever do, you might not want to go into the pastry place as you're sniffing like, it smells good, but I don't know. Which this may be a funny way of expressing NPCs' personalities through the creatures they've become. Oh man, yeah. Omen says the hero's brother turned into a minotaur, but he's essentially a cute cow who's obsessed with milk. Yeah. Hey, you could have a little. I mean, like I said, you could have some fun with it and still make it dangerous. And if you really have like a long-running campaign, these are great ways, much like television shows here in the States, where they'll have a long-running series and they'll use uh, Halloween as at least one holiday where they get to throw a monkey wrench into the system. They get to do something different, and this is a great way to do that. Where the the so-called womanizer of the town becomes like a minotaur or something, and he's trying to collect his group of cows or something like that. Thank you, Omen. And again, for those who don't know, if you're a person who likes to use Discord, if you go over to Fantasy Grounds Discord server and join there, on the left slide past all the classmates and collegiates down into the boiler room. That's where we hang out there. And if you want to post like a link or picture, or you have something that the chat window in YouTube cannot take, then yeah, you could do that. Now, elements of people changing into horrific monsters could be that on this All Hallows Eve in your world, that maybe this is something that's insidious that happens, and people who do not protect themselves either through like behind closed doors, behind sigils of power or prayers or something of that nature, there could be this like a sweeping horror, almost like a fog or a mist, or a blood moon or something of that nature that happens during this particular occasion. And during that time, as innocent people begin transforming, it's possible the PCs can do something. Uh, the PCs may have the power to circumvent or stop or reverse these effects before they become permanent. And along their way, you could have an escalating adventure where only a few people have been affected by it, but as the PCs travel from one place to another, maybe there are druidic standing stones and they have to travel a few miles to get there to perform a ritual sacrifice, gather elements or concoction or what have you. And once you are there, maybe that's the way to stop it. But as you travel, more and more strangers on the road are transforming. Maybe more of the townsfolk start you know, going crazy. There's more transformations happening to innocent people, humanoids out in the woods, maybe even animals. That local bull out in the field might turn into a minotaur or something. The local rabbit might become a man eater or what have you. So, yeah, yeah. It's I, I think if you want to incorporate that and also the thinning of the membrane of power in the world. So, if you wanted to incorporate a planar or at least a little hint of planar travel in the world on, Halloween or All Hallows Eve or something, where the the membrane between the shadow world or the fey world or the world where the undead go into, undead spirits or the restless individuals go and then arrive here. That could also be something that where the PCs can get involved in it. And if you don't want to continuously ramp up the danger, maybe your PCs prefer like an investigation kind of game, or there is the settling of the spirits where the PCs have to complete a task that the unsettled spirits haven't been able to perform. That's also an idea as well, where, um, or, you know, as All Hallows Eve, the sun sets, spirits rise from their graves. Maybe people are screaming and yelling, or they're locking themselves behind closed doors. Of course, the PCs are the heroes. They're the ones that can deal with this kind of thing. They encounter some of these evil spirits that might not be able to communicate very well, but by piecing together some evidence, you find out that maybe a murder was performed, or uh, someone in town is being very abusive to their significant other or something. And each of these spirits, one by one, as they complete the tasks of the spirits are no longer restless and are able to move on because that one last thing that they needed to do is accomplished. And so the PCs, this could be both combative with, spirits that are just evil and such. It can be social, where the PCs have to communicate with ghosts and banshees and specters and that kind of thing. It could be exploration may have a lot to do with this, when the PCs must travel around maybe the countryside or in the city, or going into the deep sewers, or trying to go into areas where people have locked themselves away. Maybe the nobles have closed all of the, closed the gates of the great castle that's on the edge of town, and the PCs have to figure a way to get into the castle keep, because the ghosts are able to easily float through the walls and such, to save everyone inside. And of course, we have ourselves, ghouls and goblins and ghosts, as usual. And if you want to go traditional with them, that's pretty good. You could also reskin a lot of those ghouls and ghosts and goblins and such, based on the power level of your PCs and how dangerous you want to make them. So, for example, in your in your like ghouls and gas, maybe there are other creatures that are far more capable, more powerful, things like that, but you're just calling them ghouls and ghosts for simplicity's sake. Or maybe they're called that way because that's what people call them, even though in reality, once your sage character is involved with these creatures in this particular region, they're like, wait a minute, these aren't ghouls and ghosts and goblins. These things are pit fiends and manticores and harpies or something. That doesn't make any sense, but maybe that's what the people call them. Also, let's not forget that in a fantastical world where these things exist, that there are other cultures that may look upon All Hallows Eve in a different manner, based on who they are. So, for example, using our own real world examples of different periods of time and different cultures looking at All Hallows Eve in a different way, dwarves may look at it differently than, say, elves. For example, dwarves their term of the old hollow may have something to do with a hollow cavity in the earth, and the dead that they've interred into the ground in their deep caverns or something have become become empty. And oh yeah, 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 you're absolutely correct. The video will move and then I'll get stuck back in here, but I think the important thing is the audio. So I'll, like I said, if it's too disconcerting that the video is freezing, then I apologize for that. I'll change it and go back to the old format. But if not, I'm going to stick with this until such time as, through dead man's urging, that I upgrade the computer, maybe upgrade my speeds and things like that. So, and of course, I am broadcasting over multiple platforms, so that of course has a lot to do with that as well. Now, so going back to dwarves, dwarves may look at um, Hollow's Eve as maybe like an empty cavity down deep in the Underdark, where maybe the those that have fallen are past there, and the fallen leave that gap in the earth, making it a hollow cavity. Whereas, say, elves may look at it differently, especially if they're woodland elves, or they're living in trees or whatever, and that the hollow for them might be a different uh, have a descriptive nature to them. And so for them, it might be just hollows in the trees where they collect foods and berries and roots and seeds and such for the coming winter. And for them, it might be a gathering of family and friends together, and maybe a little bit of an honor for the hard work that people have done to hunt and gather for materials that they're going to collect together so that they can survive the winter. Whereas the dwarves could care less about the coming winter because they're unaffected by the winter, but they may have a lot of concern about their ancestors coming to life during this period of time. So, uh, yeah, and yeah, for those who don't know, daylight savings time, or sorry, here in the States it's called daylight saving time, will end, and so our clocks will be off quite a bit for a little while. So yeah, Rickard's talking about also wintertime, so we won't be able to make it to streams until we resync. That's the issue. Different countries have this happens at different times for the syncing and resyncing. Can somebody put that into the Discord when that date is? I believe it's November. So is it next Sunday? Thank you. Next Sunday is ours. So and yeah, Deadman points out that hollow and hallow are two different things, and it's possible that stealing from the real world um, structure of how Halloween has been looked at in different ways. My point is that different cultures may look at it in different ways because of how they describe it, right? So what I'm saying is that a visitor goes to the elves and it's called Hallow. Another visitor goes to the dwarves and it's called Hollow. And for some reason, these events happen at the same time, so they kind of converge together, right? It's like a super coincidence. I guess would be the way of describing it. I'm trying to describe it, and maybe I'm doing a really bad job at it, but yeah, and yeah, Hallow means holy, yes, and for example, here in the Midwest in the States, there are a lot of religious people who feel that celebrating Halloween is tantamount to um, satanic panic when it comes to role playing games. That children and people shouldn't be celebrating Halloween because it has its connotations with evil, whereas if you depending on if you go back far enough, that it absolutely had its origins, part of its origins with more of Christian religions before, or parallel, um, during its parallel inception amongst pagan religions as well. And so, um, yeah, Vince says, yeah, as an evangelical Christian, I can confirm that this also here is in some rural areas. Absolutely. And but Omen says, but some people might say there are no coincidences, right? Yeah. That is a truism. Having, I mean, it's when we're going to do this, I think, when we talk about world building, but we often, and it can be kind of complicated, but we often think of holidays as being very singular, much like singular worlds, singular cultures. In our intellectual properties, it's a desert world. It's a singular culture. Oh, all dwarves think this way, but that's not the case. And when it comes to holidays, sometimes simply because of the time period of the year, it's harvest time. It's the changing of the leaves. It's going from fall into winter. And so you could make the case that in a world where everyone has to prepare for the winter, um, the parallel development of a particular holiday makes a lot of sense. Um, Tesla says the clocks get set back 1 hour in the US. So to someone whose clock doesn't change, the stream will be 1 hour later. Yep. Yep. There are parts of the US where people, like in parts where I'm at, there are parts of Indiana where their time does not change. Uh, and so they remain the same, but the people around them change, their time changes as well. Which let's if we incorporate that into our talk about Halloween, it's possible that there is a this is the day in the world where uh, there's a time change that becomes like a period of stasis, which might be kind of strange, where the PCs and those who have an arcane bent are unaffected, but everyone else is in like stasis. So for an hour, I'm just calling this off the top of my head, right? For an hour, everything is in stasis. The sun doesn't move, the wind stops, um, but there are like these evil things running around, um, and the PCs are the ones who are able uh, to try to stop these things before they in, embed themselves into people's souls or hide under people's homes or something like that. Much like much like the person that goes around to have to get rid of like termites or rats or something like that. That could be it. Ah, so Vince says the thing is Halloween came here from the US. We did not have it before. I did not know that. I didn't know we exported holidays like that. Talking about e- the exportation of Halloween to Germany. I didn't know that. It's called, I'm not going to pronounce the German, but it's called Walpurgis Night. And Rickard says, I mean, I guess you could sanctify your jack-o'-lanterns, so I guess you could hallow your pumpkins as well. Hallowing your pumpkin at Halloween. Yeah, hallow your hollowed, or hollow your hallow pumpkin. Yeah. Vince goes on to say, where witches gather and you are allowed to do mischief. That's another thing as well. Mischief night might be, or the mischief night is a thing where maybe there are mischievous creatures. Of course, we talk goblins and other type creatures, sprites, goblins, fey creatures like to do this, satyrs. Maybe this is an excuse for them to come out of the woodwork, as it would, to cause mischief. And maybe the PCs are the only ones who can see them for what they are. Everyone else just thinks that they're visitors having fun. But the PCs might be the ones who are like, no, that's a real satyr or a harpy or a siren or a sprite or mite or whatever it might be. You need to leave them alone. Goblin or whatever they are, goblinoids and stuff. Deadman says, like Christmas being a pagan religious holiday to celebrate the middle of winter before Christians appropriated it to become the day to celebrate the birth of the Christ. Exactly. And for while I have no intention of arguing the merits of one or the other, I think we can all say that essentially Halloween is one of those holidays where whatever your belief system, it's probably true. Even if it contradicts someone else's belief system, Halloween has now become a holiday that has incorporated so many other cultures, and then even within those cultures over time, they've shifted themselves that pretty much anything you assume about it is probably true, either past, present, or future. Oh, wow. Omen says we just have a Day of the Dead like the Mexicans. We just do it a little different. We've brought up Day of the Dead before and talked about that just when we did our week of just general celebrations and festivals and holidays. But absolutely. Um, yeah, Vince says we had to bring in everything we stored outside once they took out our garden door and threw it up in a tree. Oh, mischief night. Yeah. Rickard says, you exported the commercial idea of Halloween. The original Halloween did exist. All Hallows Eve as such was a thing, just not the pumpkins and trick-or-treating. Well, we like commercializing things a lot, which does have its problems. Um, Tesla puts in the Devil's Night descriptor. Um, October 30, which is the day before, Devil's Night dates from as early as the 1940s, which is pretty recent. Traditionally, city youths engage in a night of mischievous or petty criminal behavior, usually consisting of minor pranks or acts of mild vandalism, such as egging, soaping, or waxing windows and doors, leaving rotten vegetables or flaming bags of canine feces on front porch stoops, or toilet papering trees and shrubs, which cause little or no property damage. They still do the toilet papering around, I've seen, and the flaming bags of feces part is pretty dangerous, but whatever. However, in the early 1970s, the vandalism escalated to more destructive acts such as arson. This primarily took place in the inner city, but surrounding suburbs were often affected as well. The crimes became more destructive in Detroit's inner city neighborhoods and included hundreds of acts of arson and vandalism every year. The destruction reached a peak in the mid to late 1980s. I remember that, with more than 800 fires set in 1984 and 500 to 800 fires in the 3 days and nights before Halloween in a typical year. Yes, I remember lots of dumpsters were set on fire. Things were thrown into dumpsters and set ablaze during that time. Now, I didn't grow up in Detroit, but the 80s was those were my formative years. So absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm just reading into the chat here. Easter. Oh man. But maybe we might turn back around to how we celebrate different types of holidays, which might be a thing, right? Where in our role-playing games, the the PCs may need to learn um, the PCs may need to learn how to socially interact with some of the more dangerous beings that arrive at this particular time in your world, and then how to deal with them. Basically going 0 to 60 and wanting to go, strike every creature that they see, strike them down. Of course, some of them may be innocent, or it might elicit like some kind of like war that extends far past this one particular holiday, or it may be a case of needing to, because of this devil's night mischievousness, there may be things done like kidnappings, hypnotism, um, polymorphing, the theft and destruction of certain types of property, and to bring everything back to normal. to recover as best as possible at the end of this holiday of um of the Halloween period. The PCs may have to do more than just attack things, right? They may have to recover valuable jewels or get back people who were kidnapped, or the idea of the children being led away by a flautist, or whatever you may call. There could be fake creatures or people who have, they're drinking the Fey wine and are slowly transforming themselves, and the stopping the goblins from performing various methods of vandalism. And I think this really works especially for people who have a love for low level type of gaming, or I dare say even um, low magic setting. And I'll follow me on this. I don't mean low magic as in there isn't any magic, but if the PCs don't have access to uh, spells that are just very, I spend a spell slot and make something disappear. If they have to gather information, evidence, get people to talk to each other, perform, use performance and persuasion and threats or deceit or whatever to get these otherworldly creatures to do what they want, then that might be a great way for the PCs to engage in this particular, maybe this one-off in your world, or this particular section of your world, without necessarily having to draw their weapons, right? This is a great way to incorporate. It's also a great excuse to incorporate very powerful beings in your world that have a great influence without necessarily the PCs needing to attack them. So the pit fiend that's walking the earth at this time, a very powerful creature, may only be able to do so as long as the PCs do not stop this creature. And the pit fiend probably doesn't even want to kill them. Maybe this is the one and only time it's able to walk upon the earth and seed the world with his agents or something of that nature. And the only way it's able to do so is because the people maybe fall victim to its wily ways or something. And that might be the reason that the pit fiend even has any power. And if a pit fiend lives for 1,000 years, maybe it's kind of amused by the panic that people have, like whatever. Yeah, Rickard says, at least in Sweden, you go out to the graveyards to light a candle on the grave of your loved ones. The U.S. Halloween was more of our Easter, which I think that makes perfect sense, right? There could be, this may be using the different elements of the Halloween. This could all happen on the same day, where a group of people go out to, say, a local cemetery or the local location where they honor their loved ones, and so a small group may go there, whereas a small group of vandalizing young people might be doing something, whereas, say, another group of people maybe locking themselves in their homes. Maybe there's another group of people who are engaging in song and dance or what have you. And so, much like a dungeon, the PCs may need to travel from organized group to organized group to settle the issues that are going on in those locations. So this might be a great way to have an open air dungeon that, instead of walls and caves and square grid mapped rooms, it's, oh, we need to go out to we need to go out to the fields. Oh no, we need to go into the courtyard. Oh, we need to go to the local cathedral or something, and so on and so forth. We need to go out to the harvest or something. So you could do that as well. Yeah, Omen and Rick are talking about the parallels between Easter and Halloween. Yeah, Vince says, I once had an idea where the main theme is wild versus town, and you need to learn more about the creatures of the wild to survive. Would be a huge sandbox where you have to protect and establish towns to survive. I like that as well. Maybe there's during this so many creatures uh, are spawned forth on this day when the sun goes down that the city must be protected. It's the here in the States, it would be much like a very common trope amongst like the Wild Wild West, right? Um, a big wooden forted town held against the oncoming armies or attackers from the outside, the savages from the outside, and the PCs are on the are they're on the battlements, and they're the ones that have to prevent these things from entering and such. And now, remember, in a lot of intellectual property, you have the idea of the one person who desperately wants to open the gates to let those things, whatever those things are inside, whether they are nihilistic and they feel like there's no reason to hide themselves. Maybe there's someone has a relationship with one of these so-called outsiders and they want to let that loved one inside. Some people are paid or threatened to open up. Others have a belief system that tells them that these ravaging outsiders should enter into a town. So you do have, instead of just having a black and white PCs are on the walls, enemies on the outside of the walls, there might be the issue of having to deal with the people inside who might be causing more trouble or just as much trouble protecting the town than those on the outside. Yeah, Ricker says, so back to Monster Monday. Monster Outfit Festival is an amazing time for mimics, monsters to sneak into town. Hell yeah. And as a matter of fact, this might be the excuse, much like appropriating or commercializing a holiday. This holiday may have existed, Halloween may exist as a thing, and those mimics and doppelgangers and Rakshasa and silver dragons. Come on, there's some other creatures that actively polymorph. I know you guys know some of them. Maybe they are the ones that are like, oh, here's a perfect excuse for me to sneak into the town. I'm going to pretend I'm so and so, and that's what they do. They sneak into town. Also, a great place for people who have mental intrusions, hypnotism, mental insertion. What's the creature? The brain creature with four legs. The intellect devourer goes inside of someone's mouth and inserts itself into their brain or something. And so you could absolutely positively have an excuse for, like, the holiday itself may be pretty benign, but there are very subtle, insidious creatures that are working their way into the town, and the PCs have to stop this thing, or they discover that it's happening in the first place and no one believes them, which would be another complication, that the PCs are like, no, there are real demons here, and everyone's like, whatever. Real demons don't exist, or even if they do exist, real demons have to be summoned by arcane masters or something, and then no one like that is here. They all exist in the main city, 8 days away from us. They're not here, or maybe they've been doing this because the membrane between worlds has always been thin. Maybe it has happened each time, and each time it has happened, the people who say it's not going on are the very ones who have been manipulated into believing it hasn't happened. Rickert says, as an example, in Wheel of Time, they have a similar festival to celebrate the victory over the evil forces in a war a few hundred years back. So you can easily work it into your setting. Oh, of course, of course. And again, the changing, modification, appropriation of a holiday is a thing we do today. Why couldn't that be done in your own fantasy or semi-fantasy world, right? Maybe a few hundred years ago, it was a celebrate the victory of a war. Maybe 200 years after the war, it became a celebration of a harvest. Maybe after the harvest, it became a celebration, or it might be a way to protect the town from evil forces. Maybe after that, it became a giant festival for just having fun and gathering with family and friends. And so each of those periods of time, true at its time, leads up till today. And so, yeah. Deadman says, silver and gold dragons both could freely polymorph self at any age, and copper dragons could polymorph self at will starting at the young adult stage. So they may be involved in it too. Of course, Halloween we tend to, think of witches, hags, ghouls, goblins, ghosts, but there may be other creatures involved in it as well. Maybe those witches and hags and such may have more power, or they are drawn to population centers either instinctually, they can't control it, or this is a perfect timing. Maybe it's has to do with the alignment of the stars and the moons and such, that magic has a lot of power at this time. And so maybe your silver, gold, and copper dragons come out of the woodworks because they understand that those the 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 birth of more warlocks giving of themselves to evil forces. This might be their holiday of doing things, right? The person who's like, their harvest crops did not bode well, and they feel fear for themselves and their family's safety during the winter season because they feel they're not going to survive. When mom goes out into the field and begs any force to listen to her, and that she'll do anything to let her family survive, when she gets tapped on the shoulder by some demonic entity and it's like, you'll do anything? Sure, I'll help you out there, young lady. I'll protect your family, guaranteed, no problem. You just owe me one thing. You know, and that may be where that kind of thing starts, or at least it's very easy for that kind of power to exist in the world, and the PCs might have to like throw a monkey wrench into all that, or at least hide out when these evil things start ravaging the countryside and whatnot. Now, the more intelligent creatures, I'm sure, will not make a big deal of it, but might be a really good distraction for them, where they have these other creatures of power running around causing all kinds of havoc. It's very possible that these other these other monsters and creatures themselves are like a distraction. So goblins causing